One of the things that I firmly believe in is that the future of education in universities needs to be built around co-creation. I think this is a fundamental design principle that we need to see going forward in education, that students and staff need to work together to design programs. As I mentioned earlier, we often assume that we as university staff understand what it is that students want, and generally we don't. We think that we understand why it is that they're learning, and we generally don't. And we think we understand what it is they want to do with their knowledge once they've completed, and we often don't. I think if we provide courses where it is possible for students and staff to sit down and actually vary the content of what they do, to look at different ways of getting to particular learning outcomes even within the one course, to look at different ways of looking at engaging with students around different ways of assessing students' progress towards different learning outcomes. I think out of that comes real innovation, and out of that becomes greater engagement for both staff and for students. So the issue of co-creation and student-centered learning, I think, is really, really important for building a basis for staff engagement with students. It's really important that when we think about the learning process and we think about designing learning experiences, that we think about the context in which learning takes place. And that context is not just the university context. That context is the student and their career, and that context is also the world of work, the world where that learning gets applied. And I think as part of that design process and a part of the co-design of learning, I think you have to engage stakeholders like industry. So I guess the first piece of advice I would give is around the co-design and co-creation of learning experiences. If you really want to engage with a student, and if a student really wants to engage with a teacher, then there's no better way than to sit down with them and discuss and negotiate what the content and nature of the learning experience is going to be. Now, we all recognise that at the end of a degree, a student has got to have a certain body of knowledge and has got, they've certainly guaranteed learning outcomes. But I think we recognise that different students and different groups of students, there are multiple pathways to get there. So if you use the opportunity to kind of sit down and discuss what those pathways might be, to talk about what assessment mechanisms might be used, and what assessment alternatives might be used within a unit, to talk about the different ways in which the different forms of content and the ways in which content might be delivered between students and teachers, I think then you start to get real engagement. You start to see true co-creation of knowledge, and I think that creates for a much better learning outcomes, as well as a much more engaged student body and a much more engaged teaching workforce.